The dog hit the door before anyone touched it. Not barking, not growling, just his whole body, 90 pounds of Belgian Malinois, slamming against the reinforced panel of Trauma Bay 3, like he knew something was wrong on the other side before the monitors even screamed. The orderly stumbled back. The security officer reached for his radio. And Sylvie Tran pushed through the crowd with a trauma kit on one shoulder and someone else's blood already drying on her forearm, because that was Tuesday. She heard the dog before she saw him. That low, continuous sound, not quite a bark, not quite a growl. The kind of sound that came from somewhere deeper than instinct. The kind that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up even when you were trained not to let things do that to you. "Get the dog out of the bay," she said to no one in particular. Nobody moved. The patient on the table was male, early 30s, with the kind of muscle that came from years of carrying weight in places that didn't make the news. 2 GSWs to the left side, one to the shoulder, one lower, and his blood pressure was dropping in the way that meant hurry, not panic, but hurry. The field dressing was military grade. The IV in his arm had been placed under pressure, in the dark, by someone who knew what they were doing. The dog stood over him, not beside him, over him, straddling the man's left, facing outward, watching the door. Every time a scrub moved, every time a monitor beeped differently, those amber eyes tracked the sound. When Dr. Pemberton stepped forward with a laryngoscope, the dog turned and showed teeth. "This is insane," Pemberton said. He was 47 and had worked trauma for 20 years, and Sylvie had never once seen him take a step back from a patient. He took 2 steps back. "Where is security?" "Working on it," said someone near the door. Sylvie set her kit on the counter. She'd done 2 tours embedded with a Marine Expeditionary Unit as a civilian trauma specialist before she was 30. She'd seen working dogs. She'd seen what they did when they decided something was a threat. She'd also seen what they did when they were scared. This one wasn't scared. This one had a job. "What's his name?" she asked the room. A young corpsman near the door, barely 20, face the color of old chalk, said, "The dog, the patient, Staff Sergeant Adrian Holt, Army Ranger." Sylvie looked at the dog. "Belgian Malinois," she confirmed. Not standard issue for Rangers, but not unusual for certain units, whose paperwork tended to be thin. The dog's vest had been cut away. Someone had done that before transport, probably to access wounds, but the collar was still on. No name tag, a single worn patch still attached near the buckle. She couldn't read it from here. She took 1 step toward the table. The dog swung around so fast she didn't see him move, just felt the change in air pressure, and then he was between her and Holt, not snarling, just present, blocking, and those eyes were locked on her face with an intelligence that made her stomach drop. "Easy," she said. Not to the dog exactly, just out loud, the way you said it when you needed something in the room to change. The dog didn't move. She crouched down. Slowly, the way she'd learned to move around animals and around patients who'd been through things that made the body read all fast motion as danger. She put her kit on the floor. She held her hands open, palm up, in front of her knees. The dog watched her. Around them, the trauma bay had gone strangely still. Pemberton hadn't left, she noticed. He was standing near the crash cart with his arms crossed, watching. The monitors still alarmed. Holt still needed a chest tube. But nobody was moving. The dog looked at her hands, then at her face, then at her left wrist. She had a small tattoo there. Had gotten it 8 years ago, 2 weeks after her second deployment, in a shop in Oceanside, California, that smelled like antiseptic and cigarettes. A caduceus with 1 modification. The wings were gone, replaced with 2 small stars. It was the symbol for the 2nd Medical Battalion, which had been attached to the 1st Marine Division during the period when she'd served. And she'd gotten it because she was 24 and had just watched 3 men survive injuries that should have killed them, and she needed to mark that somehow. The dog stepped forward. He pressed his nose against her wrist. He inhaled. Then he sat down. Just like that. 90 pounds of coiled muscle and controlled ferocity, sitting on the floor of Trauma Bay 3 like someone had said the word and he'd been waiting for it. He looked up at her. His tail moved once, slowly, against the linoleum. Sylvie didn't breathe for a moment. Then she stood up, picked up her kit, and walked to the table. "Okay," she said. "Let's work." The chest tube took 11 minutes. The bleeding slowed. Holt's pressure came up by the time they had him transferred to surgical, and the attending who took him looked at the chart and then at Sylvie and said, "Good call on the 2nd IV," which was the closest thing to a compliment she'd get that night, and that was fine. The dog followed the gurney to the elevator. The elevator doors closed. The dog sat in front of them. Security showed up with a leash 20 minutes later, 2 officers and a man in civilian clothes who hadn't been there before, and whose access badge was a color she didn't recognize from the hospital's standard system. He was maybe 50, with gray at the temples and the posture of someone who had spent a very long time being the most dangerous person in most rooms. He walked like he was cataloging exits. "That your dog?" Sylvie asked him. "He belongs to the unit," the man said. "I'm Agent Carver. I need to talk to whoever was first contact with the patient. That's me." He looked at her, the kind of look that was actually reading, not seeing. "Name?" "Sylvie Tran, trauma, and you can talk to me after I check my other patients." She didn't wait for his response. She found out later, from the corpsman who was apparently incapable of keeping his mouth shut around anyone who bought him coffee, which Sylvie had exactly once, that the dog's name was Bravo, that he had been Holt's working partner for 4 years, that Holt's unit had been operating in a capacity that the corpsman couldn't name and wouldn't, but that the ambush that had put Holt in her bay had happened close enough to home that it implied something that nobody was saying out loud yet. Someone had known where they'd be. Sylvie filed that in the back of her head and went back to work. The second time she saw Bravo was at 2 a.m. She was walking the 4th-floor corridor, which was where they'd put Holt post-surgery. Because even in a civilian hospital in San Antonio, there were protocols for patients who came in with federal badges and military escorts. The floor had been quieter than usual for the past 6 hours. The nurses up there had that particular brand of tension that meant they'd been told something without being told enough. Bravo was lying in front of Holt's door. Not inside, outside. His chin was on his front paws and his eyes were closed, but she knew, from the way his ears shifted when she stepped off the elevator 20 feet away, that he wasn't sleeping. Agent Carver was not there. There was a different man in the chair beside the door, younger, tired-looking, with a shoulder holster visible under his jacket, because whoever had briefed him had apparently not mentioned that federal agents in hospitals made nurses nervous, and nervous nurses made everyone's job harder. He stood up when he saw her. His hand moved toward the holster and then stopped, because Bravo had opened his eyes and looked at her and done nothing else, and the man clearly understood by now that Bravo's reactions were a more reliable security system than his own instincts. "I need to check on the patient," Sylvie said. The man hesitated. "He's my patient," she said. "I performed the initial trauma intervention. I have both a professional obligation and a legal one. You can come in with me if you want." He stepped aside. Holt was awake. That surprised her. He'd been in surgery for 3 hours, and the anesthesia alone should have kept him under until morning, but his eyes were open and tracking, and when she came through the door, he looked at her with the particular focus of someone who had been trained to wake up ready. "You're the one who got the dog to stand down," he said. His voice was rough from the intubation. "He stood down on his own," she said. She crossed to the monitors, checked his vitals, made a note in the chart. "I just crouched down." "That's not all you did." She glanced at him. He was looking at her wrist. "The tattoo," he said, "the 2-1 caduceus. Bravo's previous handler was corpsman with 2nd Med attached to 1st Marines. Name was Petty Officer Diane Reeves. She was killed in action 14 months ago. Bravo was assigned to me 2 months after." He paused. "He hasn't trusted anyone outside the unit since. Not one person." Sylvie thought about the way the dog had pressed his nose against her wrist, the way he'd inhaled and then sat down. Like he'd recognized something. Not her. She'd never met Reeves, never served with that specific unit. But the symbol. The proof of a shared world. "Animals grieve," she said. It wasn't a profound thing to say. It was just true. "Yeah." Holt's jaw moved. "They do." She finished the chart note. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. "Nurse Tran, trauma specialist," she said, reflexively. "The man who brought me in. The one driving the vehicle before the helicopter transfer. Do you know what happened to him?" She stopped. She turned around. "No one brought you in by vehicle," she said. "You came in by medevac directly to the trauma bay." Holt looked at her for a long moment. "That's not what happened," he said. She went to find Carver. He was in the family consultation room on the 2nd floor with another man Sylvie hadn't seen before. Younger than Carver, sharp-looking, the kind of face that was made for not being memorable. They both went quiet when she opened the door, and she recognized that particular quality of silence The kind that meant she had interrupted something that wasn't going to be explained to her. The patient says he was brought in by vehicle before the helicopter transfer, she said. He's asking about the driver. Carver's expression didn't change. Staff Sergeant Holt is on significant pain medication. He was on no pain medication when he told me. He came out of anesthesia clean, which is unusual but not impossible, and he was completely coherent. She kept her voice level. If there was a first responder who transported him to the pickup point, and that person is unaccounted for, that's relevant information. It's being looked into. By who? By people who are authorized to look into it. Sylvie had worked alongside federal agents twice before in her career. She knew what being managed felt like. She also knew that there was a version of being managed that was just bureaucratic caution, and there was a version that meant something had already gone wrong, and they were trying to contain how wrong. This felt like the second kind. I want to know if there's a safety concern for my patient, she said. On this floor, in this hospital. If there is, I need to know because it affects how I do my job. Carver looked at her for a long moment. Your job is to keep him alive. My job is to keep everyone on this floor alive, she said. That includes the nurses, the other patients, and the orderly who's been up here every 4 hours for the last 6 years and has no idea what he walked into tonight. Carver said nothing. She left. At 4:30 in the morning, one of the fourth-floor nurses came to find her. The dog is growling, the nurse said. Her name was Patrice, and she had been doing night shifts for 11 years, and Sylvie had never once seen her look rattled. She looked rattled. Not loud. Just that low thing. It hasn't stopped for the last 10 minutes. The agent called it in, but he's waiting for a response, and I don't. I just thought you should know. Sylvie was already moving. She took the stairs. Bravo was on his feet when she came through the fourth-floor door, still in front of Holt's room, but standing now, his attention fixed down the corridor toward the service exit at the far end. The agent, the tired one, whose name she still didn't know, was on his phone, back pressed to the wall beside Holt's door, watching the same direction. The corridor was empty. The service exit door at the end of it had a small rectangular window. In the window, there was no light. The floor's overhead fluorescence lit that exit from this side. If there was nothing in front of the window, you'd see the glow reflected off the metal push bar. You'd see something. There was no light in that window. Something was blocking it from the other side. Get the patient moved, Sylvie said. The agent looked at her. I can't authorize. You don't have to authorize anything, she said. You have a dog indicating a threat at a service entrance and a solo agent on a floor with one way in and one way out. Get Carver on the phone and tell him to move the patient, or don't. But I'm going to go open that exit and see what's there. You can't. She was already walking. She heard the agent behind her start talking fast into the phone. She heard Bravo's nails on the linoleum as he fell into step beside her, which she hadn't expected, and which did something to the fear she was managing. Made it smaller, somehow. Made her step steadier. She was 15 feet from the door when it opened. The man who came through it was in scrubs, blue, the color the hospital used for environmental services. He had a badge clipped to his pocket. He was carrying a mop bucket. He looked at her. He looked at Bravo. His hand went for his pocket. Bravo moved. It happened so fast that her brain registered it as a series of still images rather than continuous motion. The man's hand going into the pocket, Bravo launching off his back legs, the man's arm going up, and then Bravo had the arm and they were both down on the floor, and the thing that had been in the man's pocket, not a phone, not a wallet, skittered across the linoleum and came to rest against the baseboard 2 feet from Sylvie's right shoe. She looked at it. A syringe. She had Patrice call the code. She had the agent, who arrived at the correct level of pale, stand on the thing until someone with gloves could bag it. She stood in the corridor with her arms crossed and her heart rate doing something she wasn't going to examine until later, and she watched the man in the scrubs be secured, and she thought about Staff Sergeant Holt asking about a driver. She thought about Carver's face when she'd mentioned the first responder. Someone had known Holt was here. Someone who had access to the hospital's internal systems. Someone who could generate a badge, get a uniform, know which floor, know which room. Not someone who'd followed him here. Someone who'd been here first. Carver arrived in 12 minutes. He was followed by 4 people Sylvie had never seen and would not see again, who moved through the 4th floor with the efficient silence of people who clean things up for a living and not in the way she was accustomed to. He stopped in front of her in the corridor. "The first responder," she said, before he could speak. "The driver Holt mentioned. Was he one of yours?" Carver's jaw worked. He was one of Holt's team. He got Holt to the LZ after the ambush and then went back to locate the others. "Is he alive?" "We don't know yet." "Does whoever just got arrested in your hospital corridor know where he is?" Carver looked at her with an expression she couldn't read and said, "That's what we're going to find out." He started to walk away. "Carver," he stopped. "When you figure out how someone inside this building knew exactly where Holt was tonight," she said, "I'd like to know, because I have other patients on this floor, and I'd like to know that whatever breach let this happen isn't still open." He looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't have to walk toward that door," he said. "I was the only one moving," she said. "So yes, I did." He nodded once and left. Holt was transferred out 3 days later. She knew it was happening because Bravo disappeared from the 4th floor corridor at 6 a.m., and by 6:15 the room was being stripped, and by 6:30 a transport team she didn't recognize was loading equipment into a service elevator with the particular organized speed of people who did this often. She didn't get to say goodbye to the patient. That happened sometimes. Most of the time, actually. People came into the bay broken and went out repaired, and the in-between was Sylvie's, but the before and the after belonged to their own lives, which continued without her. She was in the staff lounge refilling her coffee at 7 a.m. when Patrice knocked on the doorframe. "Someone left something at the front desk for you," Patrice said, and held out a small, sealed envelope. Inside was a card, plain, white, no letterhead. On it, in handwriting that was neat and slightly right-tilted, like someone who'd learned to write fast under field conditions, "The driver made it out. Thought you should know. Holt PS Bravo says thanks." She put the card in the pocket of her scrub top. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, San Antonio was starting its morning. The light coming flat and clean over the rooftops, the way it did in early April. The sky that particular shade of pale that would deepen to blue by noon. Somewhere across the city, Holt was being moved to somewhere she didn't know and would never know. Somewhere else entirely. A man who'd gone back for his team was probably sitting in a debrief room answering questions for the 2nd or the 3rd or the 5th time, alive when he hadn't been certain he would be. She thought about the tattoo on her wrist, about a dog who had recognized a symbol in the dark, in the noise, in the blood and the chaos of a trauma bay, and had decided that meant something. She thought about Reeves, who she had never met, who had trained a dog to look for that mark in the people around him and to understand what it meant. She thought that sometimes the things you carry with you, the marks you put on yourself after the hard deployments, the ones you get because you need something outside your body to prove that what happened inside it was real. Sometimes those marks speak to things you never intended them to reach. She rinsed her mug. She had 8 hours left on her shift. She went back to work.